So, without further ado, Alison, the law, why? Where did it start? What drove you to it?
Interesting question. Well, when I was doing A-levels, I had no real idea what I wanted to do. And certainly the careers advice was, why don't you do a law degree? That means you can go into the law, but you don't have to. It's a good degree if you want to go into business or whatever it might be. So I took that advice, not knowing at all what I wanted to do. And then when I started the degree, obviously when you start off, it's all very generic. You do lots of different things, particularly back then. There was, I think, less specialty then than there is now. And I really liked it. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the interpretation and the way things were applied and all of those sorts of things. But I still wasn't sure exactly where I wanted to go with it. And the reality is, until you get into maybe halfway through the second year, you haven't really then got to start taking decisions. And at that point, they were saying, do you want to be a solicitor? Do you want to be a barrister? And I was thinking, barrister, that's not what I want to do. I do not want to be standing on my feet all day talking. So I followed all the things that they said to do, not really thinking exactly where it would lead. Fortunately, I had a relative who was a partner at Mackrell.Solicitors at the time, and I'd never really had anything to do with him, but he had found out I was doing a law degree. So he actually called me up completely out of the blue and said, look, I hear you're doing a law degree. Why don't you come and do some work experience at Mackrell.Solicitors? And I said to him, actually, I've got a job at a local firm in the high street. I'm going to be doing their filing for 6 weeks or whatever it will be. And he said, yeah, but this would be much more fun. Come up to London, blah, blah, blah. So I said, OK, fine. So I let the other job go. And I came up to Mackrell.Solicitors, and we were based in Covent Garden then. And loved it. You know, I sat with the outdoor clerks. We had an outdoor clerks team at that point. And so every day we were going down to the High Court, issuing things, going before the masters, going to council's conferences. And it was, to a degree, a different world then, in terms of on a Friday, everybody would go out Friday lunchtime down the pub. No one would go back Friday afternoon if the partners didn't go back, etc., etc. And I did that, I think, in my first summer vacation during the degree. And then they invited me back and said, come and do some more. And I did all sorts of things during that work experience. I worked on reception. Yes, I did filing, all sorts of things. But it gave me a real insight to the firm and also how the law works. And it's probably very different now to what it was then. But at that point, it made me think, actually, yeah, I quite like this. And, you know, I'd been lucky because my experience had been litigation related. And that's, to me, that's exciting anyway. And so I thought, actually, yeah, that's, you know, and so the law for me was actually going to court and anything litigation related. I had no concept about conveyancing or private client or anything like that. So having had the work experience and, you know, massive fan of that, encourage everybody to do work experience if they can. It sort of went from there. And I didn't look back. Absolutely didn't look back.
And so how many years, without giving your age away, how many years is that now since those early filing and reception days?
1987 was the first work experience.
Okay.
So I've been around Mackerel since then.
And you talked about sort of variety and the fact that that was actually really interesting and gave you an overview. But when you were first starting out, and I know you've also said that things have changed, and we'll come on to that. When you were first starting out, what was the most difficult thing?
I think being yourself, you know, finding your voice, actually. You know, when I first started, and everybody who's known me for many, many years will know this, I sat with Chris Croxton, who's our senior partner. So I was his trainee, in effect, article clerk as it was then. I sat in his room. I was facing a wall and he was facing into the room. And certainly for that first couple of weeks, I was scared to move. You know, even if I wanted to go to the ladies, I was like, oh my God, how do I do this? And, you know, he knows that I found that whole experience quite scary. And then it's not until you sort of bed yourself in and get to know everybody, and then you realise actually it's an open door. You know, everybody was on first name terms. You could go to anyone about anything. And that's always been the beauty of the firm, in that it's a family. We call it the Mackrell family. I know we call MI the Mackrell family, but you know, Mackrell's here is absolutely that. And so once you get over that hurdle and realise that everybody's door is open and everybody's there to help you and is friendly, then you know the world is your oyster, actually.
And how, I suppose, looking back at that, since you now, you know, have a team, you see, and for some time you've seen the wave of sort of eager young lawyers coming up into Mackerel, not just in your own department, but throughout the firm. Those early years, how have they, I suppose, influenced and coloured the way that you help younger lawyers integrate into the firm? That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is, and what do you think they can do to help themselves?
Well, you know, going back to the primary point, work experience is invaluable, and the only way you're going to know if you want to do this as a career is to get work experience. And so, you know, at any opportunity, if someone approaches me, I will always give them that opportunity if we can facilitate it. And obviously, it's very difficult currently because of having people in the office, but up until this point, we've always facilitated that. And the majority of our younger lawyers have come that route because they have been people who have done work experience with us, and we've seen something in them and thought actually they would be great for the firm. So I think that's very important. It's important to get to know people and for people to get to know you, and whether they think that you've got what it takes for that particular firm. So I think that's important. And now I've forgotten the second part of your question.
Well, I'll come back to that in a second.
Okay.
So, you said you've seen something in them. What are you looking for in them?
Personality. I mean, you know, if you get a law degree, or in fact any degree which gives you an entrance to the profession, clearly you've got academic ability, and you go through your, whatever they call them now. In my day, it was the Law Society finals, but I don't know what they call them now. So you've got that academic ability. So that's a given. But for us and our sort of firm, it's about personality. It's about commitment. And it's about wanting to build the business and form really good, long-standing relationships with lawyers, but also with the people that you mix with and the people that you come into contact with, because it's the people in your life experience who potentially then become your client base. And actually, that's something that Greg taught many of us many years ago. That's one of his things, that anybody you meet in life potentially could end up being a client or someone who introduces work to you. So everybody that you meet is important.
So coming back to the second part, you may have sort of part answered it. When you see new intakes coming in, what do you think they can and should be doing in order to integrate both into the firm, connect with others, and I suppose learn appropriately?
I think enthusiasm is key, and almost it sounds like an odd phrase, but sort of making yourself invaluable or you know, indispensable. And that doesn't necessarily mean just from a work point of view. You know, sometimes silly things. So if a client turns up and our reception isn't open, anybody should feel happy to go and make them a cup of coffee. You know, any of us would do that, partners or otherwise. So it's little things like that. So not, I suppose, not being precious in what you can or want to do. It's a team. You know, we work as a team. And if somebody needs something, or, you know, whatever happens, if someone's working on a huge case and they need support, then any of us would step in and help. And that's what it's about. Well, certainly in the sort of firm that we're in, you know, we're in a very different space to a big city firm. But for us, it's all about that support, that enthusiasm, wanting to grow the firm, wanting to work as a team, and everybody moving in the same direction.
And when this is a question that came out of actually our last mentor session, and it's something that we put in the intro to this. What sort of things, and we'll broaden out after this, but what sort of things, when you see the crop of up and coming lawyers, are the things that frustrate you as, let's call it a line manager, as a lawyer? What are the sort of things, and do you see trends, or does it tend to be individual to individual?
I think there's a trend. You know, when I started, if you got what you considered to be a good job, it was a job for life, and you really stuck with that. It was important, and that was how you saw you could grow your career. The longevity. I don't think there's longevity in the same way now. People are much more happy to hop firm to firm or job to job.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
And I think that can be quite difficult, particularly given the sort of law that I do. So doing family law, it's very, very hard if there's a constant change of personnel to maintain the continuity for the client, because what we're doing is intensely personal, so we need to maintain that continuity. So I don't think longevity is the same as it was when I was a girl. But I think also, different things. So if you say to somebody, research something, it has been known for people to use Google as the first point of research. Again, when I was a girl, we had books and we read books, and that's how we did the research. We have online resources now, and they should be the first point of contact. So, going to Google, that's not the answer. And this isn't, I don't think this is a trend, but it is something that you see, and I think we are all guilty of as young lawyers, and I certainly know that I did this when I was a young lawyer, which is, if someone says to you, can you advise the client on a point, you set out what the options are, you do your research, you set out what the options are and what the consequences might be, and then you say, there you go, there are your options. Well, actually, that's not quite what the client is paying for. The client's paying for you to say, okay, this is what you need to do. So give me the answer to where I need to go with this. So I think, and that can be hard as a young lawyer. That's really hard, because you're asking someone to nail their colours to the mast and explain why they're taking that decision. But that's what we're here for. That is what we are paid to do.
So what you're saying is, actually, what a lawyer does, and I think probably very much so in the 21st century, is it isn't just about the law. That sort of comes with the territory. That's the sort of the basics. It's actually about that business and personal advice.
Yeah.
Okay. So coming back to the point that you just touched on, then, I'm a young lawyer. I've got Alison's words ringing in my ears, and it's possibly the words of my senior partner as well within my team. Don't just lay out the legal options. Don't just point to the paragraph and the subclause, which highlights the point. Actually, put yourself out there. Give some advice. But I'm sitting there as a young lawyer thinking, but what if I'm wrong? How do I know? I don't have the experience. You, Alison, can probably do that, because you've got all your experience to sort of weigh up the pros and cons very quickly, put it in a broader business or personal context and therefore give the advice. How do you do that as a younger lawyer, and how do you do that in a way that makes it clear that this isn't guaranteed bona fide, this is what you must do as a client, this is based on the legal understanding, my understanding of what you said to me as a client and your business, and my thoughts on the matter, but at the end of the day, it's your call.
Well, I think the first point in relation to that as a younger lawyer is most younger lawyers work in a team. So you should be able to go to any member of your team, working up the tree, so to speak, and say, look, this is the problem. This is what I think. Let's have a chat about it. In terms of my department, I was very keen that when we grew, that we were all in the same space so that we can have those discussions. And obviously with COVID and, now not being in the same area all the time, everybody, I've been really keen to make sure we stay in contact every day. So we have a daily Zoom meeting, we talk about what people are doing, what are their concerns, and we talk about the cases, what the answers might be, and we talk strategy, etc., etc. So you should always be able to do that. And I would hope that anybody who is in a more senior role, certainly here we have an open door policy. You should be able to go to anybody and say, look, I've got this. This is what I'm thinking. What do you think? But also, if you've got friends and people in your peer group who have been through legal training as well, there's nothing to stop you bouncing off them as well with the ideas that you might have. And if you're uncertain, that's the key, isn't it? That the key is speak to somebody who's got some more experience, talk about that, put a draft together, let them read it, and then have a conversation about it before it goes anywhere and before it goes to the client. But as you say, any advice that you give, and it doesn't matter at what level you are, potentially you're always going to caveat it on the basis of this is what you, Mr. Client, have told me. So based on what you've told me, this is the advice that I'm giving you. There might be these other options, but I would say, given what you've told me, this is the best way forward.
Family law. How did you end up as a family lawyer then? You said you started off litigating.
So yeah, and when I qualified, I was in is the civil litigation department here, and we were doing a lot of insurance litigation at that point. There was one partner who was doing family work, and he did other things as well. And I did some training with him. So I sat with him, I don't know, 6 or 7 months when I was doing my training. And then after I qualified, not long, a couple of years maybe after I qualified, he then left. And so we were left with a situation where we had some family work. And there was only a couple of us who had touched on family work previously, and we didn't have a standalone department in the way that we do now. We were sort of servicing clients who had those needs. So I was asked whether or not I could pick up, in effect, his caseload and deal with it. So I said yes, and I remember actually saying to Chris at the time, yeah, I will, but I still want to do the litigation because actually that's what I enjoy. And he was like, yeah, that's fine. And then it just grew from there. I'm not sure necessarily it was a massively conscious decision, but we did some good work for the clients. We had some good outcomes. They were happy. We started getting more referrals. And then, the department just grew from there. So it's grown from something I would describe as being almost an ancillary service we were offering to existing clients at that point, to being a standalone. And we've now got four people doing it. So I feel quite proud of actually having got to that point, because that was, I didn't actually see that coming. I didn't see that coming. But again, the firm has always been very supportive in anybody who wants to push things forward as being new opportunities. So, for example, we've now got our cannabis team and this sort of thing. And so it stems, I think, from that sort of situation. If there's an opportunity, then we support people, and that's what happened to me. And we do that to younger lawyers now.
You've been nominated for awards now several years running and have a couple of accolades under your belt already. Why? What is it you do, Alison? Why are you that award-winning lawyer?
I'm not sure I can answer that in terms of I'm not the one that's doing the judging. I like to think that I do the best that I can for the clients and offer the best service that we can offer, and that we are available to them. But the other side to it is I couldn't do now what I do without having a team behind me. So, you know, we've built a lot of work out of various countries around the world, and I travel, historically have been able to travel in order to do that, but I couldn't do that if I didn't have a really good team here, which I do. And so when I was nominated at the end of last year for the second time, really that's a nomination for the team. That's a reflection on the team and what we do. You know, I feel we strive to offer a good service, hopefully at a good cost, and that we are available for the client. And whether, again, it's maybe a different space because family law is intensely personal. And so there are clients who need to know that you're available if they have a problem. And our you know, their problems are not 9 to 5. You know, it can be at weekends, it can be in evenings or whatever it might be. And most people are very respectful of your personal time. But if they have a problem out of hours, you need to be able to deal with that.
And I'm glad you touched on that because, in fact, and thank you for listening, everybody, because I've had a question in about family law, which is quite nuanced and quite interesting. So you practice in the sort of challenging and very personal area of family and matrimonial law. As a woman, do you think that when you have a bad day at the office, or you have to deal with something particularly upsetting, it affects you more than it would do a male colleague? And if that's the case, how do you deal with that? That's come in anonymously.
Okay, I'm not sure necessarily it does. I mean, I don't have children, so maybe not having children enables me to look at children issues a bit more dispassionately. I've always thought the fact that I trained as a litigator, when I'm looking for answers for people, I'm looking for that cost-effective route out for them. And I maybe look at things differently than if I trained as a family lawyer, because I think there's a difference in the training. But I don't, you know, I think if you deal with something during the day, which is upsetting, I wouldn't say upsetting. I wouldn't say that happens very frequently. There's a lot of days which are frustrating maybe because the client's behaving unreasonably, or the other side is behaving unreasonably, or the court is just no help at all, which is our current biggest challenge. But I don't think that would affect you differently whether you're male or female. Actually, it's a frustration, and that the sort of work that we deal with, I think the upsetting parts may be the intensely personal, with children and things like that. But you have to be able to walk away from it. You absolutely have to be able to walk out of the office and think, okay, I'm done for today. I don't need to think about this anymore. It might go around in your head. You might be sitting at home having a glass of wine, and it might buzz around in your head. But there are days which are very challenging, and I actually can feel when you walk out of the office, it's sort of just draining away from you. And if you weren't able to do that, if you weren't able to walk away from it, then I think that would be problematic.
And is that something, you know, being able to put those boundaries, mental, and you said in some ways sort of physical, there, is that something that's come with time and experience, or do you say, does that come back to that broader work experience and that experience in litigation that allows you to approach things differently?
I think it's probably the litigation experience. Yes, of course, we've all got the cases that we're working on in that particular moment in our heads pretty much all the time, in terms of if something happens, you need to be able to pick up and run with it straight away. But as a litigator, the majority of the cases that you're dealing with,
it's 8 o'clock.
It's about money. So it doesn't have that intensely personal nature. And I think maybe with that training behind me, it makes it easier to just switch off a little bit more than maybe ordinarily you would do.
And then sort of leading on from that, how do you maintain work-life balance? Or is there no such thing? Because I know your managing partner thinks there's no such thing. Love your work. That gentle, shy managing partner.
Yes, which we've all had, massive experience of. Work-life balance. Well, we do what we do. It's not a job. It's it isn't a job. You have to love what you do, and as I say, you can never completely switch off because you never know what's going to happen, who's going to call you, what might be needed. So, but that doesn't mean that you can't travel or do whatever it is that you like to do from a social perspective. So I've always been very lucky. Again, up until COVID, I've travelled widely. A lot of the travel has been Mackerell International related. So I've had some great experiences being part of the organisation, and travelled widely, but that hasn't stopped me having to work or deal with clients. So, and I wouldn't necessarily want it to. I wouldn't necessarily want to be in a situation where I disappear off the face of the earth for a week or whatever it might be. As I say, most clients are really respectful of the fact that you do need time, and they will only contact you if it's super urgent. So on the basis that that's the way that most clients behave, then I think it's a two-way street. If they need you, you need to be there for them. That's what they pay for. So, and I think COVID has been quite interesting in terms of working at home, particularly during the first lockdown when we were at home 24/7. Those first few weeks, it was very difficult to think, I need to stop now and have an evening, because there was nothing to stop you working. And so you had to get into a mindset of, okay, stop, it's still going to be here tomorrow, go and do something different. So, and I think that was an interesting lesson to learn, really interesting lesson.
I've had a question come in from Fino. Thank you, Fino. I'm going to get to that in a second, but I want to touch on two things. You talked just now about needing to love what you do, and yet when I put as one of the questions for you to answer, how have you stayed in love with the law, you rolled your eyes metaphorically and said, really, Keith, that question? So yes, Alison, that question.
No, but when you say in love with the law, what do you mean by that? You have to like what you do. So I do like what I do. I like what the law throws up in terms of challenge, and how you can help people with their problems, but within that legal structure. So, and it's not black and white. I mean, we're very lucky in England, particularly with family law, in that it's not a black and white answer. If someone comes in with a problem, you ask any of my team, and we'll probably all come back to them with slightly different answers. So the crux of it will be the same, but there could be a nuance on it. So because we have a discretionary jurisdiction, and because of the way that the law is applied, there's always a little flexibility. And we always say to clients, if you go to court, there's a band of what might happen. So there's always that risk there. So going to court is always a very risky process, as well as being very, very expensive. But think carefully about doing that, because we cannot 100% guarantee to you what the outcome will be. there's been a couple of instances, particularly when I was doing civil litigation. I did one particular case with Chris where Chris's phrase was, "This is something like the most secure file in our cabinet. There's no problem here." And we went down in a complete ball of flames. So you can never be sure. You can never be sure. As soon as you walk through the courtroom door, you have lost control, and it's down to the judge.
So actually, that then brings me on to another question. When we were talking beforehand about, setting up this session, again, it's like one of those terrible interview questions. So Alison, let's talk about your weak points. But rather than that, I talked about mistakes that you've made along the way and learning from mistakes. And you said something very interesting. You said, mistakes, I've had a few, but I don't stop and reflect on them. And I was really interested by that because, to become a multi-nominated award-winning lawyer, Nigel's paying me for that, by the
way. Handsomely, I hope.
You've got to have learnt along the way, and you've just talked about, there's that classic example which was nailed on, not a problem, down in flames. So where's the balance between not dwelling on something and yet learning when you've lost a case? And I'm sure sometimes you lose a case and there's nothing you could have done about it, and other times you think, maybe, or that's an interesting argument from the other side. So
I think not dwelling. If you lose, you lose, and if you've done the best that you can for the client, then in the litigation field, and family law is in the litigation field, that sort of goes with the territory. Not everybody can win. It's very much the case now with family law. They try not to say winners and losers, but someone's always going to feel unhappy. If you've done the best that you can for the client, and you feel that you prepared it in the right way, and you looked at all the possible avenues, then what more can you do? As I say, when you go into court, you then lose control because it's down to the judge, and the judge is human like the rest of us, and depending on what side of bed he or she got out of, who knows what the answer might be. But I think everybody has those experiences where you think, okay, so that didn't go as well as I thought it might, or it didn't go as I expected. So why didn't it? And how can I take that on in the future? So based on the experience that I had with Chris on that case, I would never say to somebody, this is absolutely a slam dunk. That's never going to be the case. I wouldn't do that now, because clearly you could never be 100% sure. So of course you evolve and you learn by the experiences that you have. But that's life, isn't it? Whatever you're doing, you learn by that. And actually there's no harm in having those experiences. You can't necessarily win all the time. And equally, you're dealing with clients who are human, who are instructing you to run a case in a certain way. Now that might be against the advice that you've given, but if they want to run it, then they are paying you to run the case in a certain way. So providing you've advised them as to actually the best way to move forward, and they've had that advice, if they say, well, actually, I hear what you say, but I want you to do this, as long as you're not doing anything illegal, misleading the court, or whatever it might be, you have to go with that, because you're as good as your client's instructions.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a question, but I'm going to come back to it so you can ponder. If you think back to being, the developmental stage of your career, was there one instance or a particular instance where you thought, okay, that happened and I've learnt from it? You talked about the sort of never never say never, but never go out and say anything is nailed on. But is there something else, particularly thinking about sort of, okay, now with the wisdom of a bit of experience and the breadth and depth of that, I wouldn't have done that I did as a young lawyer? And I'll leave you thinking about that, because I've had two questions come in. The first one's from Fino, who says, in school, we were taught that it may be a good idea to hop onto Google prior to engaging in our normal legal research to familiarize ourselves with an area of law we may not know much about, because of the cost per click model of many legal research tools, and costs can get run up learning the basics. Can you elaborate a little bit on your aversion to Google?
Well, my aversion to Google, if you're advising a client and you're looking for authority in relation to the advice that you're giving, then using legal resources, you have that authority and I suppose the authentication that it is a legal resource. When you're looking at something on Google, particularly if they just give you the results and they don't give you the authority for those results, that's when you can tend to head into difficulties. And I think also I did have an experience a number of years ago with a trainee who will remain nameless, who cut and paste something from Google as being the advice to give to the clients. And I read it and I thought, well, that's a little bit, it was quite well worded actually. So I actually put it into Google and it came up as to where it had come from. And I was like, no, that's probably not the right thing to do. Because if the client does, it was word for word. If the client does that, then he could have done that himself, actually.
So I guess there's no issue with, go and do the broad research beforehand, so you can familiarize yourself with broader context. But when it comes to the next level up, then use the legal resources to make sure that you've got the right authority.
Yeah, and I think also if you're asked to research something, what I always find really useful, and what I say to the people around me is, can you put it in an email or a memo or whatever it is, in words that I can send to the client and that they will understand? So take out that legalese, and let's have it in simple English that you can put it to a client and say, this is the advice, but it's very understandable, it's very readable. And I think that's very important as well. It's very easy to go to any resource, cut and paste and add bits in. But actually, when you send the advice to the client, you want a tailored advice, but in language they will understand.
And that was a really interesting point that you're echoing, that Lorraine from Sandberg Phoenix made. Is one of her great learnings was when one of her partners says, you need to be able to explain this case to your grandmother. However complex the case is, whether it's commercial or family or so forth, it's got to be words that your grandmother may have a PhD, but fundamentally the point is somebody needs to be able to understand it, words of one syllable, summarized clearly, and openly. And I guess that may depend from person to person. Another question that's come in, when would you not accept a client, and what might the factors be around that?
Interesting. In fact, to a degree, this sort of feeds into the bigger question that you asked me to ponder over. I think if you're faced with a client where you have concerns about how honest or genuine they are being with you, so if you get a feeling that you are being misled, at the end of the day, we're officers of the court. So if we are putting together whether it's documents or we have to go before the court at a hearing or whatever it might be, and you're putting the client's case, then you need to feel that the case you're putting is genuine, and they have the appropriate information to support what they're saying. So I think if you're faced with somebody where you feel uncomfortable as to whether or not they're being honest with you, I mean, clearly you can test what they're saying in terms of getting instructions from them. I think that's probably the main situation. I mean, the reality is it's quite rare to find yourself in that situation. I haven't been in a situation for a long time where we've actually said no to someone. There are some people who we can't help because maybe we don't do that sort of work or whatever it might be. Having said that, that doesn't stop us talking to them and saying to them, actually, having heard what your problem is, we can't help you, but we know someone that can. And that might be a different sort of firm. It might be actually they don't need English legal advice. They need advice from Hong Kong or Singapore or whatever. So again, we can refer. So it would be very, very rare for us not to talk to somebody and find out in some shape or form whether or not we can help them. We offer a free initial consultation. So we always have a chat with somebody and see whether or not we can help them, and indeed whether they need us, because some people actually, they might not need us. They might just need putting on the right track so that they can move forward and deal with things on their own.
Okay. And again, I suppose less of your role now, but as an up-and-coming lawyer, as a next-generation lawyer around the network, Mackerell International, so what? It's all very nice that my firm's part of this interconnected international network. And actually, I've sat here today in Malaysia or the US or Scotland or wherever we are, and I've learned a couple of things from Alison, but really, what's the point?
Huge resource. So a resource, whether or not you've got a legal problem, we know we can speak to anybody around the world and say, I have this problem, can you help me? How many people are in that situation? A huge opportunity to build really good, long-standing relationships. I've been involved with MI since the early 90s, and I value the relationships. They're professional, but they're also I consider the people to be friends, and I know that if I needed something, you can call them up and they will immediately help you. But also it's a massive resource for clients as well. And it goes back to the point of there are some people that you speak to who don't need your help, but they might need a lawyer in Cyprus. So you can introduce them to Sanella, for example, put them in contact, and they'll be forever grateful. And if they speak to somebody else, they'll say, yeah, speak to Alison at Mackrell's because she helped me with this. She might be able to help you with that. So in so many ways, it's a huge resource. And yeah, I can't imagine actually working in an environment where it was purely domestic, because so many of the clients we come across just in the family law field have got some sort of international connections. So, whether it's a holiday home overseas or they were born somewhere different or whatever it might be. And so having that resource and to be able to pick up the phone or email somebody and say, this is the problem, what do you think? Again, great referral point, and also a good support. If you need that support, if you're faced with a challenge which has got an overseas element, you can always speak to somebody and they'll help you.
Thanks, Alison. And I think the beauty, particularly for next generation, is start getting to know your next gen equivalents in neighboring countries and beyond that. We had a session with the next generation champions of various regions yesterday, and one of them said, I am going to be much more comfortable reaching out to sort of my peer in another firm than I am going to the senior partner, because I know that he or she is probably going through similar things and is even if they pass it upwards, and even if it comes back down again, we've made that connection. So I think, the beauty of this is start using that resource and building those networks now. Coming back to family law, I've had another question come in, which is AI. Does that have a place in family law going forward?
Well, strangely enough, we do have an AI package that clients can use on our website. So we signed up to it about 18 months ago, I suppose. And basically, it enables clients to go on the website and feed in all of their information, personal, financial, whatever it might be, in their own time. So they can start it, stop when they want to, go back to it. And then when they're ready, they can make contact with us and say, we've done this, can you review it? And it produces a lot of great documents for us. So it saves a lot of time and money in terms of the information that it gleans from the client. We would normally sit with the client for a couple of hours. So it's saving money from that point of view, and it enables us to review everything. And then when we have that first conversation with them, we've already got all the information. So you're already a step ahead. So I think it does. I mean, it's a great package and it works very well. And also the good thing about it is because you can go onto the website at any time. Clients, English people living overseas, if they're in a different time zone, they can still do that and then send it to us. We'll review it, then we have the call or the email or whatever it might be. So yeah, definitely there is a place for it.
So I guess it's for that initial triaging. Mm-hmm. And summarizing, and then you can pick the bones out of it.
Okay. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. We've got about sort of just over 5 minutes left. So it's been great to get the questions in. Thank you very much. So if you've got a question that you haven't asked, now is your chance to pop it in. I'm going to give you a time machine, Alison, as a thank you for doing this session, and you are going to go back to 1987 or maybe 1990, maybe early 90s. Imagine what you were wearing.
It's not.
imagine the hairstyle.
But no, it's not that either.
Okay, you are going to go. There are photos.
There are, sadly, yeah.
You are going to go back and sit with your younger legal self and be able to go, listen, if there's one thing you take on board right now into the next couple of decades, and by the way, watch out for 2020, yeah. Go to Australia at the end of 2019, yeah, exactly. But apart from that, if there's one thing that you could take, you could advise your younger legal self or your younger personal self, maybe let's split the two, what would you say?
I would say if you're offered opportunities, take them, run with them, give it a go. You've got nothing to lose, and you never know where that might lead and what you might achieve out of that. The legal world is different now to what it was then, in terms of you need to be mindful of business now and not just be a lawyer. Back then you could be a lawyer and you didn't need to worry about anything else. Whereas now you need to be a business person. You need to think about how the business runs and cash flow and all of those sorts of things. So they're all very important. And so building relationships is crucial. So all those people that you're at college with and your friends, and maintain those relationships, and because they will be, this is a lesson that Greg Bergman taught many years ago, they will be crucial to you moving forwards. And that's exactly right. All the people that you grew up with, you're at college with, you started work with, one of the guys who trained with me when I was training here is now a sole practitioner, and we're still in touch and we trade work. Those sorts of things are really, really important. And I also think massively listen to people. Don't talk too much. I mean, I've done way too much talking. I wouldn't do as much talking as this ever. But listen to people, because when you're listening to people, you pick things up from them, and it's really important. People like the fact that you'll remember their birthday or you'll remember their kids' names. And when you talk to them again, those sorts of things are really, really important. And that makes a difference. At the end of the day, it's an old phrase, but people do business with people and they come back to you because they like you as a person. So if you can build those relationships and maintain those thoughts, then I think that's crucial. As I say, it's very different to what it was when I first started. But those things now, and I'm sure in 20 or 30 years' time, it'll be different again. But those things right now, especially with where we're at, trying to maintain connections with people in this way rather than face to face has been a complete learning curve for everybody. And I think most people have done quite well, and it's reinforced the relationships and the fact that you are reaching out to people. When we first went into the pandemic, I said to my team, okay, every day reach out to somebody that you haven't heard from for a bit. And we did a different person, each of us, every day. And again, that's proved to be really good, not because we were looking for work from them, but just to stay in contact with people. And everybody's been very complimentary about that. So important, I think, staying in contact with people, very important.
Brilliant. We haven't had any further questions in, so that's your last word, Alison, unless you've got a last word.
No, said way too much.
Brilliant. Well, listen, I really, really appreciate that. I hope everyone on the call has gained something from it. And actually, if nothing else, Greg Bergman, thank you for getting up early in California and joining us, because there's Alison saying, I learned from Greg many years ago, and I guess passing that baton on, if there's a torch that we can pass on from generation to generation, from across jurisdictions, then that's a very, very powerful thing.
Add that Alison's presentation was so spot on. Every single thing she said was excellent and applies universally. And I wish I would have known all that when I was a young lawyer. It's so much easier now. Only thing I'd add is actually repeating is, if you relax and treat people well, it's amazing how you get it back through the years. Because it's all about who likes you, who trusts you, and then you perform.